we're going to take a look at an older video. It's about a year old by Riley J. Davis. And this came up via an article. It came through my Twitter feed. And after watching her video, I just couldn't resist. But just remember, everyone, you can't be sexist if you don't identify as a sex.
Recently on the internet, there's been a lot of discussion around genital preferences and transphobia.
Hold on, I have just the thing for this.
In this video, I'm going to use the word cissexism instead of transphobia, but they're really similar words. At its most basic, cissexism means prejudice or discrimination against transgender people. So what's been happening is that some people are making the argument that it's not cissexist at all to only be attracted to people with one kind of genitals.
That's right, guys. If you don't like taking it in the butt or sucking dick, then you are transphobic.
For example, these people might argue that being attracted to only women with vaginas in no way negatively affects trans people. On the other hand, I would argue that it's more complicated than that. We all have our implicit biases built into our preferences, and gender isn't as simple as just the genitals you have. But after I say that, I usually get a bunch of blatantly cis-sexist responses, so I thought I'd address all of those responses at once.
Alright, so buckle in, buckaroos. This might be a bit of a long video.
Number 1, you're being homophobic. In this argument, I often get accused of homophobia, lesbophobia, or lesbian erasure by lesbians who believe that I'm trying to change their sexual orientation or identity. They say that my language sounds a lot like a dude who tried to turn them straight, or like conversion therapy. Those responses are rooted in cissexism. This is because I'm not telling lesbians that they can't be lesbians. If you're a woman who only likes women, go ahead, identify as a lesbian. But some women have penises.
No, they don't. No, they don't. You're thinking of chicks with dicks. Completely different.
And if the fact that some lesbians might be attracted to those women offends you, it's because you don't think trans women are real women.
Well, they aren't women, and I'm not offended. I just think that you are a crazy person. Not just the human race, but virtually every other form of life on this planet has sexual dimorphism. There is a male and there is a female. Now, sometimes there are mutations and there are problems that happen, so there are a few different hermaphrodites that can happen. They do occur in nature. However, they don't set the rule. They are an exception of the rule. This new definition of gender has really confused so many people. Our biology has two configurations, male and female, and that's why it's so obvious to tell when certain people, like say this lady here, that she's biologically a man because of the shoulders, the face, the voice. There are two main configurations for how our DNA makes us.
That's because these accusations of homophobia make it sound like I'm trying to convince lesbians to like men, but I'm not. I'm trying to show that preferences for women with vaginas over women with penises might be partially informed by the influence of a cis-sexist society. You do not have to like men. You do not have to date men or have sex with men. And if you think that's what I'm arguing, you're simultaneously strawmanning my argument and implying that trans women are men.
They were a man, then they became trans. And for the record, it's not that anyone cares what you do on your free time, what gets you off. We don't want to have to jump through all of these invisible hoops on a whim, especially when the trendiness of each and every new political word is gone by the time people like me hear about it.
Number 2, you're upholding rape culture. This is honestly the worst response that I've heard and probably the most cis-sexist one. That's because trans women have a long history of being accused of being rapists by cis women. It's the logic behind bathroom bills that prevent trans women from using the right bathroom. It's why some cis women are terrified of the idea of sharing a locker room with a trans woman.
Well, this is a valid concern for a lot of women because men are quite dangerous, them being biologically, physically more powerful. And it's not even close. That's why spouse abuse is so bad, because it's quite honestly not a fair fight. And I can't speak for everyone, but my concern wouldn't be for the few trans people that want to use the restroom that are using it honestly. My concern would be for how this could be exploited by, I don't know, sick and crazy people that want to rape women, want to dress up like a woman and wait for the right opportunity. The possibility's there, and giving people more opportunity to do such things
This is a very common tactic used by anti-trans folks to discredit trans women as just men trying to invade women's spaces so they can rape them. Even if this is not your intention when bringing this up, this is what you are implying, and it is where this argument comes from. Suggesting that trans women are rapists for wanting to be fully recognized as women is extremely harmful. And
I don't think the argument is that trans women are rapists. That's a pretty broad generalization. But rather that an opportunistic rapist could use this as an exploitation to have a better opportunity to rape somebody. That would include a trans woman, at least in this scenario.
I should note that I'm not saying you have to do anything without consent. I'm a big fan of affirmative consent, and you should never feel pressured to have sex with somebody. This isn't about an individual. This is not saying you have to have sex with a trans woman or you're cis-sexist. It's saying that you should examine the societal influences on your preferences. There's a massive difference between honing in on individual scenarios and considering wider societal issues and attitudes. Number 3, I'm allowed to have my preferences. Technically, you're right. You're allowed to have your preferences.
Yeah, you're allowed your preferences. Only technically, though.
And you don't have to change anything. But there's more to it than that, and ignoring the deeper issues by stopping at a surface level analysis doesn't do this issue any justice. Like, you're allowed to have a lot of things. You're allowed to have prejudice towards trans people, but that doesn't mean you should. So if we look a little deeper into this issue, there's the possibility of your genital preferences being at least somewhat partially informed by growing up in a cis-sexist society. There's also the fact that a preference is different than saying you would never do something. Like, having a preference for tall girls is fine, but refusing to date anyone under 5'7" is ridiculous. And obviously that's not a perfect analogy because short girls as a group don't face the societal marginalization that trans women do. But
marginalization, disenfranchised. You know what? It's time for affirmative action to meet your penis.
I'm interested in having a conversation about labels and implicit bias and trans-inclusive language. Simply saying, it's my preference, end of discussion, is a good way of sidelining all of those issues and instead centering the feelings of cis people in a discussion that's about trans people. Number 4, I have a trans friend who says this is okay. People love their tokens. I've done an entire video on moral licensing and why this is a terrible defense, but in summary, you'll always be able to find trans people to back up your cis-sexist views. You'll always be able to find gay people who spout anti-gay rhetoric. You can even find people of color who openly advocate racist policies.
I know, it's almost as if human beings are unique individuals with perspectives that have been hardened over time through their life experiences. Every one of them slightly unique than the other. But I know better.
That doesn't make you right. Having a trans friend doesn't mean you're suddenly an expert on trans issues. People often internalize negative ideas about their own identities and regurgitate them with passion. I've met gay men who told me that their homosexuality was a sin and that their punishment was to be celibate for their entire lives. And even still, they'd probably go to hell. Obviously, that would be anti-gay for any straight person to say, and it's also not okay for gay people to advocate that. In the same way, if trans people are saying cis-sexist garbage, it's still cis-sexist garbage. And look, there are cis people who are on my side as well, so if you think it's okay to point to your token trans friend, then I can just point to my token cis friend.
I think in a lot of cases when someone says, hey, well, my trans friend or my black friend, it's them trying to be relatable, at least to the person they're talking to.
Number 5, I'm triggered by penises because of past sexual trauma. That's completely understandable. I've never said that anyone should have to have sex with someone with a penis if they don't want to. If intimacy with someone who has a penis is triggering for you, I would never suggest that you have to do that. Take your time to heal and work through your trauma at your own pace. Just be aware that the majority of people making the I could never date someone with a penis argument are not doing so because of trauma or triggers.
Because I don't like penises, I find them disgusting, and they get me the opposite of sexually aroused. See, as a fucking white cisgender male, I like a woman with hips, some nice curved natural breasts, big eyes, the whole deal. A trans woman will never have these qualities.
So that is all of the typical responses I could think of. The first 2 responses in particular come from TERF, radfem, and gender-critical ideologies, which are all proudly anti-trans. Even if you don't consider yourself a part of those movements, you're siding with them when you use their arguments. Their entire platform is cis-sexist, and their arguments reflect that. So even if you say you believe trans women are women, it doesn't do a whole lot of good if you're still completely siding with folks who don't believe that trans women are women. And the last thing I want to say about this is that if you'd rather not have sex with a woman who has a penis, maybe just don't make such a huge deal of it.
People like you are the ones making a big deal about it. Heterosexual human beings are the norm. I'm sorry. It's just the truth. Actually, I'm not sorry. That's just the way of the world. We're normal. So when a normal person's confronted with something that's a little different, and hey, honestly, no shame for that, just don't bullshit us, you should expect them to kind of have an abnormal reaction.
Trans women are often afraid of not being found attractive or desirable after coming out, and you're not helping. If you really want to be an ally to trans people, you could just not talk about it. And by that, I'm not trying to censor you, okay? So don't pretend this is censorship. You have the freedom to say whatever you want. I'm just asking you to consider if it's necessary to say those things when they reflect harmful or violent rhetoric. Because if you have an opinion that you know is only going to make people feel bad about themselves, why constantly share it with the world?
There are a lot of reasons, but the first one would be to help someone who's being absolutely delusional. Take, for example, a kid who demands that he be identified as a penguin.
You have a costume on, son.
This is my skin. I'm a penguin. You can't discriminate against someone by who they are. I identify as a penguin, and this is me as a penguin. This isn't a hood. This is my penguin head. You can't tell me not to be a penguin. I was born a penguin, and honestly, that's against the law to discriminate. And if you go through with this, I will let the ACLU know.
I need to call your mom.
You can't ask someone who's Islamic to go take off their turban. That's not okay.
It's fine to not find people attractive, but it's mean to constantly yell about how unattractive you find those people, especially when those people are oppressed. For another imperfect analogy, it'd be like if you weren't attracted to girls with short hair. That would be fine, but you probably wouldn't write articles and make videos defending why it's okay for you to not like girls with short hair. You could do that, but sometimes it's just best to be polite. And that is everything I have to say on that topic.
We live in a cis-normative society, right? And this is a good thing. It's because it's backed up by our biology. Hundreds of thousands of years of evolution or passing our genes to the next generation, because like the rest of the life on the planet, there's a male and there's a female, and there are sometimes hermaphrodites that pop up, but there's such a small percentage we can't be expected to make a rule over it. Now, the idea of having 90 plus genders, which the last I checked, that's how many there are now, the idea of that makes it impossible to try to find people that aligned with what you were attracted to. Can you imagine if it was so difficult to try to discern a real woman out there? And I don't mean to be disrespectful if I come off that way, but if you go out there to meet a woman and you keep turning up chicks with dicks all the time, wouldn't you eventually get discouraged? I mean, hell. I don't want to make this hard for them, but I don't want to make it impossible for society.